Welcome back. If you just joined us, you're watching Diplomatic Channel on Channels Television, and I am Amarachi Ubani. Ambassador Robin Sanders was a former U.S. ambassador to Nigeria from 2007 to 2010, during which time she visited almost every state in the country. And since taking up other opportunities to serve the United States, she has visited Nigeria several times and considers herself one of us. In this interview with our correspondent in Washington, D.C., Maria Bird, she speaks about what impacts the recent terrorism summit held in the U.S. will have on countries and how Nigeria can devise workable solutions to its own problem with terrorism.
You know, many people are talking about the U.S. Terrorism Summit and what the risk that it poses and ultimately what the outcome will be. What are some of the outcomes you believe that the Terrorism Summit will have for the world, but specifically Nigeria?
Well, I think the overall goal the president had was really to begin a dialogue, a global dialogue on how we combat extremist terrorism. There are a lot of elements that have come out of that in terms of the way forward. You know, what's the counter message out there so that you have a counter message to the recruiting messages that are going out from ISIL to Al-Shabaab to Boko Haram. Working with social media, both on the private sector side and with government organizations as well as civil society organizations. How do you get that message out there? How do you encourage young people to look at other alternatives besides joining these groups? So there's a big communication component to it, which I think is very, very important. The other thing really is cooperation among countries, not only through intelligence linkages, but also on the diplomatic front. How do we work together as a global community to combat extremist terrorism? And I think those are the main elements that have come out of the summit, the president.
Now, many people are criticizing the summit, and they're saying that there was not enough discussion about other areas, specifically Africa, as it looks at security and counterterrorism. What is your opinion on that?
Well, I think if they're criticizing, they really haven't read all of the stuff that's come out of the summit. Sub-Saharan Africa and North Africa are specifically mentioned in the outcome fact sheets that the White House put out, and it was also discussed at the summit. Now, I think, you know, from what I understand from most African leaders in the African diaspora here in the United States, where we are today, is that they feel like there's a disparity between the focus on the MENA region, and particularly ISIL, and less focus on North Africa and Sub-Saharan Africa. But I think people have to understand that there's always a national security, a homeland perspective that has to take precedence first. And I think from our perspective, the immediate potential threat to the United States is really coming from groups like ISIL. Probably also Libya, I would include in that too, given what happened at our consulate there. So those are going to take precedence on the military side, probably more than North Africa and Sub-Saharan Africa. But it doesn't mean that we don't care about those areas and that we don't see our role there as a friend and a partner to be very important.
Now, we know that Secretary Kerry and we know that others have shown their support, or at least said that they support the government in Nigeria as they prepare for the elections. How is the U.S. supporting, and what type of aid efforts or efforts in general are they putting forth for securing the borders and making sure that Nigeria is able to move forward with elections on March 28th?
Well, I think you have to bifurcate those two things, because our role would not be securing Nigeria's borders. That would be up to the Nigerian government, and military, and police to do. But certainly, having worked on the last election and the run-up to the last election, working with INEC, my team and I, we did a lot, and I'm sure that the team right now is doing the same thing. We've helped a lot in terms of training, not only with INEC, but with political parties, with civil society, and supporting their efforts. We've worked a lot with particularly political parties to make sure they're more transparent in terms of the election list going forward. So there are a lot of training things that we do under USAID that we are doing now for the Nigerian elections.
Now, you mentioned USAID, you mentioned the U.S. government, but as we really look at what's going on in Nigeria and will the elections actually happen? I mean, the world is kind of a little bit scared of whether or not this will actually happen. And I know various American Nigerians here who are in the U.S. are stating that they're not sure if it's really about security as they look to prepare for the elections.
Well, I think the time will tell on that. I am hopeful for a couple of things. One, I do hope that the elections do take place on March 28th. I think another postponement will do two things. It will really shake the confidence of the Nigerian voter. I think it would also shake the confidence of the international community. But most importantly, it will further embolden Boko Haram. I think they think that they can deter another election in Nigeria, and I think that that would be a really bad signal. So I'm hoping that the elections do happen on the 28th, and I hope these three things, that they're fair, they're transparent, and they're free. You know, the fair, free, transparent. Those elements have to be there. And I think the world is really looking at Nigeria and counting on Nigeria. And Nigerians are counting on Nigeria to have those elections be those three things.
Now, as you know, there's international community supporting Nigeria and looking at Nigeria. Many people are stating that they're really in support of the opposition. They're not as in support of the current president, Goodluck Jonathan. What is your opinion on that?
Well, I think I want to say, in a way, it's irrelevant because it's really up to the Nigerian people to decide who they want to lead them. It's their election. No one else is voting in their election but Nigerians. Even Nigerians in the diaspora are not allowed to vote in the national elections. You don't have your structure set up that way. So in the end, it's the Nigerian people who are going to decide who is going to govern them. So everybody can play Monday morning quarterback here as much as they want. But in the end, I think as long as people believe those three things we've already talked about, that the elections are free, fair, and transparent, I think that that can reestablish the confidence that Nigeria has in its ability, Nigerians have in the country's ability to have a democratic election. Now, people are worried whether that's going to happen. I think that INEC has done a great job. I've worked with INEC before. I think that Chairman Yeaga has a lot of integrity. Administratively, they were ready on February 14th. Administratively, I think they'll be ready again on March 28th. And so the key will be, will other forces come in to do other things that don't make the elections free, fair, and transparent?
Now, obviously, Nigerian government is stating to the rest of the world that allow this to be Nigerian focused, allow Nigerians to really get
to
this
decide
done,
for themselves,
to get this moving forward. Now, are you any concerns with kind of making sure that it does stay focused internally, and the international community not having as much involvement?
Well, I think to be fair, there are a lot of partners, donor partners like the U.S. and others that are doing things to help it be free, fair, and transparent. We talked about the training before. We talked about training election observers before. And, you know, those things are important to the transparency of the process. I think INEC has done a lot in terms of its administration of how it sees the election unfolding, in terms of how ballots are counted and the transparency at the polling places and all of those kinds of things. I think that they've also done a very good job of looking at contingencies for the IDPs that are not in their home states. But I think that there is a lot of talk about, you know, the number of IDPs that are not going to be able to vote. But if you really crunch the numbers, and I have, you're looking at a voting population with the distributed cards of about 68%. And if you look at the past two democratic elections for Nigeria, you've only had about 40% of the voter registration.
Dr. Sanders, we know that there are several Nigerians that have had to leave their homes and are refugees in Cameroon. What is your opinion on, will they be upset? What are they going to come back to, and will they be able to vote?
Well, I think we'll have to look at what areas the joint military operation has been able to recapture. I think it's going to be a challenge for the refugees. There are about 20,000 refugees, maybe between the 3 or 4 neighbors of Nigeria, that are now impacted by the situation in the north. And so I don't know whether INEC has looked at contingencies for them, but that's going to be a hard one. I think it's easier for them to put in place their plan to help IDPs vote, the IDPs in more secure areas vote. But I think for the refugees that are out, I think it's going to be very, very difficult to be able to do that. And then even if they bring them back to Nigeria, what are they coming back to? Because a lot of their villages have been completely razed, completely burned, completely destroyed. And there's no food there. There's really no environment, no enabling environment for them to come back to. So that's going to be a real challenge for INEC to take a look at, along with its neighbors, to see what can be done, if anything at all.
Now, lastly, Ambassador, I know that you've been in Nigeria for many years, and there's a great discussion of Nigerians that are in America about being able to vote, the diaspora being able to vote. Do you foresee that as being a possibility one day, and how important is that to have Nigerians in the diaspora being able to vote?
I think it's important. I mean, I spent most of my adult life outside of the U.S., and I've never missed a U.S. election. And so I think it's important for people to feel, no matter where they are, if you're a national of a particular country, I think it's important for you to feel like you're able to vote in your country of nationality. So I do think it's something that Nigeria is going to have to look at down the line. Particularly, it's a global world. People are all over, whether they're taking on another nationality or not. But if they still have Nigerian nationality as their primary nationality, and they still have that feeling that that's my home, that's where I'm from, that's where I want to participate in the political process, then it's going to be important for Nigeria to find a way to address that.